Atlas Fallen is a game I've been excited about since I first heard the announcement, and now that it's here, excited to discuss whether it's reached those expectations. Now I do have a lot to cover with this one today, so we will get straight into it, but before that, my name's Alex, this is PlayStation Corner, and if you do enjoy this video, consider subscribing, it helps us out a huge amount. In Atlas Fallen, you assume the role of an unnamed, the lowest in the totem pole of this world's class system, performing jobs no one else wants and living as little more than a slave to the ruling powers. Now the oppressive god Athelos, a massive structure in the sky, is responsible for much of the suffering in this world, and we are enslaved to them. Now the opening hour, it kind of sets the stage for the unfolding drama, beginning with a sandstorm, the theft of an item, and an assignment to go and recover it. So this mission, it leads to the discovery of a gauntlet that enables communication with a spirit and the inheritance of new abilities, including the power to transform sand into weapons. Now this newfound strength offers a chance to stand up to oppressors and even revolt against the gods themselves. Overall, I enjoyed the story, though I will say a few of the conversations they feel unnatural and they can't quite deliver on the tension they were going for. Turning to gameplay, Atlas Fallen comes from Deck 13, the studio responsible for the Surge series and Lords of Fallen, all respectable games that gave me faith in this new release. Unlike those titles, however, Atlas Fallen is not a Souls-like game, it is more action-orientated and incredibly fast-paced, drawing inspiration from games such as Horizon, Forbidden West and God of War. It's also worth noting that the game is not truly an open world in the traditional sense of one large map. Instead, it consists of multiple locations connected by specific pathways, with players loading into each area. Do not let that concern you, however. These locations, they are incredibly large, and you can fast travel between them from these specific save points. This design works well for the game, allowing for a nice variety of environments. Sand is clearly a focal point in many areas, but players can also expect to explore fortresses, jungles, hidden cities that have sunk into the world, and strongholds, and that's naming just a few of what you can expect to see. While the opening moments do find you in a more vulnerable state, the game really picks up once we acquire the gauntlet. Now this key item introduces several abilities, especially in movement and combat. Movement feels fantastic, allowing you to glide or surf on sand. Now if you do connect with a surface that's not sand, you'll switch to a more traditional sprint. Gradually you'll upgrade your gauntlet, gaining the ability to dash multiple times mid-air as well as a double jump. The combat then starts with two weapons, an axe and a ranged attack. You'll quickly uncover a third option as well, a massive sand fist that will pummel foes. I wasn't a fan of this addition personally, it feels slow, but the devastating damage, it is clear. Each weapon then offers multiple combos viewable from the pause menu, and holding the attack does deliver a stronger impact. The ranged attack then, a chain, can be used to grapple towards enemies, particularly useful for flying foes, and honestly there are too many combos to state here, but studying them is definitely going to be worth your time. You can also launch into the air and slam down, which was a particular favourite of mine. Where the combat system gets interesting though is in the weapon's ability to grow and deal more damage mid-battle. And now to the lower left of the screen you'll see a health meter and what may look like a stamina meter, but this isn't a Souls-like game. Instead, when you attack you'll be building up this meter over 3 stages. The higher it gets, the bigger the weapons that surround you become, which creates just an awesome visual. Just be warned, receiving damage or stopping your attack will cause this meter to deplete, and you'll be thankful to know as well accompanying your newfound combat abilities is the ability to parry, but it requires relatively accurate timing. Your reward is an enemy frozen in place momentarily should you pull it off. This mechanic then, this meter, also unlocks special abilities in 2 forms, Shatter abilities and Essence Stone abilities. Essence abilities are accessed by holding the left trigger and the corresponding face button, and these abilities they range from temporary power boost to defensive shields, and there's a decent amount to discover. You can see these in the lower right of the screen. My personal favourite prevented bosses from summoning smaller enemies for 15 seconds, and that was a lifesaver on several occasions. Some abilities are given to you outright then, while others are crafted from items you collect in the world. Health refills are also found in this menu as well, which is replenished by dealing damage, so the harder you fight, the longer you can stay on your feet. The Shatter ability then is more straightforward, hold both triggers for what is an epic attack that can defeat many foes or at least do some massive damage and briefly freeze that enemy once again in place. It's a simple yet powerful mechanic without complex upgrades or inputs. When it comes to leveling up, because yes, remember this is an action RPG, the focus is not on your character directly, but rather on the armor you do possess, and most armor pieces here have up to 3 upgrades, and these adjustments affect your stats. That includes recovery, offense, defense, fortune, and shatter. You'll level up then using essence dust, and this is dropped by your enemies. There's also a secondary currency, gold, which can be used at the game's many vendors. I personally found I didn't visit them all that much. This is because the game's main story provides a setup that's capable of overcoming the challenges ahead, and that occurs at key moments in the narrative. The enemies in Atlas Fallen, then known as wraiths, come in various shapes and sizes. Early challenges become more cannon fodder by the endgame, of course, but be warned, the further you do venture into the landscape, the more lethal they will become. Each enemy has an accompanying health bar and level warning, and this can actually be turned off in the options if you do want a bigger challenge. Overall, I like the general designs of the wraiths with unique attack patterns, and it gradually introduces almost towering foes that require you to destroy multiple body parts. And my number one piece of advice for any battle you head into here is master the parry mechanic, as it is essential to survival. Unfortunately, however, I did face multiple issues with the game's auto-lock system throughout, and it's often essential for success, but the camera can get wild, shooting all over the place. It frequently targets every enemy you don't want before the one you do want, and then it gives viewing angles that don't feel unnatural for navigating the battlefield. It seems it's tied to the landscape's angle, resulting in constant, almost low or tilted perspectives. Enemies aren't the smartest either. They often get stuck in the landscape, breaking immersion, though you can use this of course to your advantage. One frustrating issue I noticed is that enemies, especially those guarding something, they may disappear if you move too far away from whatever that item is. So that's going to be during the battle. So let's say you're swinging at each other, you take one step too far, they disappear, and that actually results in this enemy regenerating all of their health. While I understand why they disappear, it feels unfair, especially when it's out of your control, as you are flying around in combat, dodging multiple attacks. It's something you need to pay attention to that you basically shouldn't have to. Sadly, my list of complaints about Atlas Fallen does continue. While the combat feels heavy, can be a little unresponsive at times, or at least that's how I walked away feeling. Enemies sometimes appear to connect with you, like from the damage perspective, even though visually they don't seem to be close enough. And general enemies, they do become repetitive by the end game, even though I did compliment some of their attack patterns. The challenge often doesn't evolve either. Enemies simply gain more health and strength rather than intelligence. I think they needed more variety in the enemies you would be facing. However, I will give them this: bosses are a highlight with interesting designs that will test your abilities up to that point of the experience. The final encounter in particular is an absolute standout moment. Outside of combat then, I did find the map difficult to navigate. The game's verticality and waypoint system can make it a little awkward to actually identify your destination because it's almost like a big beam of light. There's a pulse ability that shows the waypoint on screen, but it turns the world black and white, which I felt clashed with the game's overall style. The traversal is not perfect either. While fun initially, the game leans into platforming challenges that don't always feel well designed. I frequently failed to connect with ledges or found that platforms didn't necessarily align well with the character, leading to missed jumps and stumbles, or I simply discovered a part of the map where I should not be. The game's missions also have a level of repetitiveness that wore thin on me. A big element involves collecting upgrades for your gauntlet so you can take on challenges ahead, and that requires 3 stones to power them, but this task repeats over and over, and it just drove me crazy. Then side missions, they were okay, but there wasn't enough to keep me personally invested, especially since I had the items and all of the gold I needed to overcome the challenges ahead. To close out gameplay then, when it comes to replayability, you can play solo or co-op. That option opens within around 30 minutes of gameplay, which I do think could be a fantastic time. Then on completion of the game, it will throw you back into the world so you can tackle all the side quests and these new epic encounters. I completed the main story in just a shy of 10 hours, with a lot left still to do for those that are curious. It's also worth noting we were advised to play on easy mode, which still threw up a hell of a challenge here at points because the balancing was off and they had noted bosses are near impossible on a normal difficulty, so this will be corrected in the day 1 patch, and I suspect what I played on will now be the new normal difficulty option, but it could also be a corresponding factor in relation to my quick completion time. Visually, Atlas Fallen, I like a lot of what it has to offer. The desert landscape's unique, the game wisely breaks up the map into distinct sections to avoid monotony. This choice keeps each location, unique, as I was worried going in it could be one big desert. The animations then, particularly for attacks and enemies, look great. There's something really epic about watching your weapons grow, especially the shatter abilities. Those things just absolutely go off. And then our sand surfing looks incredibly cool as well. In combat then as well, the game does a great job with visual indicators. Quick red flashes warn of incoming damage and helps you time parries. And I was also impressed with the menu design, which, despite the large number of systems to navigate, is easy to use. The game also ran perfectly for me. I had it set to quality mode, but there is a performance mode available here as well. Sadly, however, it's not perfect still. The world can feel somewhat lifeless outside of the enemies. Locations are often populated with characters to interact with, but there's a lack of movement and activity in this world, which impacts realism. Most characters are stationary, which detracts from the liveliness of this world. Also, these are the people you are protecting, but they don't do a whole lot, and I think a living, breathing world makes it a lot easier to get behind a goal as lofty as this one. I was also a bit disappointed with the lack of heavy-hitting cutscenes, which could have added epic moments to the experience, and additionally, like many open-world games, some sections they do suffer from low-quality textures, which is to be expected with a map of this size. It's also worth mentioning today as well, you will see some minor flickering for the enemies in the footage. That is going to be corrected with a day 1 patch. Finally, audio and voice acting, it varies in quality given the size of the cast, but I'd say it's mostly good. You can talk with a gauntlet, and yes, if you haven't realised, this game holds a lot of similarities to Forspoken, a game that was destroyed in the launch up to Lead. They also maybe speak a little too much here, but you can turn it off in the options. I left it as the preset because they do offer clues. The combat sounds heavy throughout, the movement sounds particularly satisfying as you zip around the world, and the music, it's suitably epic, but I wouldn't call it a standout soundtrack, rather it should deliver exactly what you would expect given the fantasy setting. Overall, Atlas Fallen feels like a game with missed potential. It boasts a fantastic combat system. It's marred though by camera and targeting issues. The world is unique, but it often feels lifeless, especially in the towns and locations you're out to protect. While the story then presents interesting ideas, it stumbles in execution, and the main questline, it lacks creativity, relying too much on repeating the same tasks. Also, the game's platforming capabilities sometimes just too ambitious, and the enemy selection, it becomes repetitive by the endgame. Scoring Atlas Fallen is a challenge. There's fun to be had here if you're willing to dig through the issues and endure moments of monotony. So with that in mind today, it's going to be a slightly above average 6 out of 10 because I still had fun with the experience, but there's also far better out there. There's good in here basically, if you're willing to dig for it, and maybe in the future with a patch or two, this could be a whole lot better. So will you be checking out Atlas Fallen? Let me know in the comments. With that, hit subscribe, join us here for reviews, deals, news and lists weekly, and I'll see you all on the next video. Thanks everyone.